Chapter 458. The general's mansion did not prepare any delicacies for tonight's banquet. The long square table set between the autumn trees in the courtyard was dark in color. There were some very ordinary dishes on it, but it had its own solemn atmosphere. There were not many servants and maidservants serving at the table. Serving the dishes was actually done by the two young masters Xiaofan. Such a scene was completely different from the extravagance of General Xiaofan in the rumors. At this time, probably the entire Chang'an city was paying attention to this banquet. However, the atmosphere at the banquet was not as hostile as people imagined. Xiaofan and Ning Ke, who sat opposite each other at the long table, just ate in silence and occasionally talked about the scenery of the wilderness and their encounters at the front gate. The simple banquet very simply came to an end. The maidservants filed in and quietly took away the leftovers on the long table. Then, they served 2 plates of blue teapots. The two young masters Xiaofan served the first cup of tea to Ning Ke and then very politely bid farewell. They walked out of the garden and asked all the maidservants and stewards to stay far away. Then, they quietly guarded the garden gate. The teapot and the teacup were the same color as the blue sky. It was rather spacious, but warm and not eye-catching. The tea was black fir tea, which was also very mild. Even the temperature of the tea was just right at this time. Ning Ke attentively looked at the teapot and slowly reached out to touch the teacup. Then, he raised his head and looked at Xiaofan at the other end of the long table. He was as focused and serious as he was when he looked at the teapot a moment ago. It was just like when he first saw Princely Peiyan in front of the hall of the academy 2 years ago. It was as if he wanted to burn Xiaofan's face into his own eyes. Xiaofan looked at the large piece of black fir tea in the cup that rose and fell in the slightly heavy warm well water. He knew that Ning Ke was staring at him. A slightly mocking smile slowly appeared at the corner of his mouth. He said, "Do you want to see clearly what your enemy looks like? You were not so presumptuous in Tuyang City." Ning Ke did not deny what he said, nor did he admit it. His fingers gently turned the small sky-blue teacup and said, "In Tuyang City, the person I respected was eldest brother, not you." Hearing this, Xiaofan slowly raised his head. As he moved, the black fur in the teacup seemed to be suddenly hit and sank to the bottom of the cup. Ning Ke lowered his head. Xiaofan looked at him expressionlessly. The autumn wind suddenly rose in the courtyard, and the treetops rustled. Countless yellow leaves of different shades were blown off the branches and landed on the long table and the ground in front of the two people. Chapter 459. The autumn wind blew into the tower, and Chang'an knew no sorrow. The autumn grain from various counties was transported to the city one after another. The good harvest not only smoothed out the wrinkles on the faces of the rural farmers, but also brought smiles to the faces of the people in the city. Ginkgo leaves fell from the branches and covered the long street. It did not look solemn, but elegant. Like in other seasons, many tourists from other counties and even foreign countries came to Chang'an with the autumn grain. Among them was a man in a light white robe. There was some dust on the man's robe, and he carried a long sword on his back. His expression was calm and gentle. Only a few people could understand the pride and indifference hidden in the depths of his eyes. He walked on the crowded streets of Chang'an. Although there were crowds of people in front of him, he only saw the historical buildings of Chang'an that had experienced thousands of years of wind and frost. There were no people in his eyes. This was the most prosperous and bustling city in the world, Chang'an. However, this man in a light white robe did not seem to feel the liveliness here. To be more precise, although his body was in the bustling mortal world, his spirit was not in this world, but in the smell of this city. Over the years, whether he was in the mortal world or outside the mortal world, that was where his body was, but his heart had been wandering outside the mortal world. Therefore, there was no prosperity in his eyes, not even people. A few naughty children ran past the man with frosted fruit sticks in their hands. One of the crying little girls almost wiped her tears on his body. He frowned slightly as he looked at the little girl's back and slowly shook his head. A moment ago, he looked at the empty street and sensed the historical aura of this 1,000-year-old city. He was just about to recite a verse, but he was disturbed by these naughty children, so he immediately lost interest. Standing in front of the stall, he watched the short boss skillfully string all kinds of fruits together and then roll them in the sugar paddle pot. Suddenly, he felt that it was pointless and walked towards the north of the city. At the top of the Wanyan Tower, Li Qingshan looked at the white chess piece that had been inexplicably split in two. He looked at the extremely smooth section of the chess piece, and his expression was solemn and complicated. There was a touch of confusion and emotion hidden in the shock. "You actually came to Chang'an? It seems that the situation is getting more and more troublesome." Huang Yang frowned and asked, "Is it really Liu Bai, the sword saint?" Li Qingshan shook his head and sighed gently. "It's not Liu Bai, but someone even more troublesome than Liu Bai." Huang Yang was slightly startled. "Is there someone more troublesome than Liu Bai?" "Yes," said Li Qingshan. Then he looked at Huang Yang and said with a serious expression, "I must leave to welcome that person. In the following days, if that person does not leave Chang'an, you must stay in the palace." Hearing this, Huang Yang remained silent and prepared to enter the palace. Li Qingshan's meaning was very clear. The expert who came to Chang'an city had the terrifying power to directly threaten His Majesty in the imperial palace. They even needed to work together to ensure His Majesty's safety. Therefore, when he went to meet the expert, Huang Yang had to stay in the palace and stay there forever. How many people in the world could pose a threat to the Tang Emperor in Chang'an? Just a few of them. The southern gate temple of Haotian was in the north city, very close to the imperial palace. Li Qingshan stood at the gate of the Taoist temple and looked at the vermilion palace wall and turret not far away. He was silent. No one could tell that he was extremely depressed and anxious at this time. The man in a light white robe walked slowly from the other end of the long street, accompanied by the autumn wind and fallen leaves. His clothes were ordinary, and only a simple Taoist bun indicated his origin. Li Qingshan looked at him and bowed calmly. "Greetings, Mr. Yi Su." The man was the world wayfarer of Haotian Taoism, Yi Su. Yi Su looked calm and bowed back. "Greetings, Zhenrenli." His way of addressing Li Qingshan was very interesting. He did not call him Nation Master or Great Divine Priest, but Zhenrenli. This was a very Taoist title. In history, the Abbey Dean of the Southern Gate Temple of Haotian Taoism often served as the Nation Master of Tang. His position in the West Hill Divine Palace was similar to that of the three great divine priests on Peach Mountain. Although Yi Su was unknown in the Divine Hall, as a world wayfarer, his position in Haotian Taoism was extremely special. He was qualified to be on equal footing with the three great divine priests of West Hill. When Li Qingshan was conferred the title of Great Divine Priest, he had been to the Jishou Abbey. It was the only time he had been to the Jishou Abbey. He knew that the simple and even shabby Taoist temple was the real spirit of Haotian Taoism. Therefore, facing the person from the Jishou Abbey in front of him, he could not help but be vigilant. The man in front of him with a simple Taoist bun and a sword on his back was not an ordinary person. He was the legendary Yi Su, the most powerful person in the younger generation of Haotian Taoism. His state was no less than that of the three great divine priests of the Divine Hall. There were even rumors that this person's state was slightly on the same level as Liu Bai's. As the Nation Master of Tang, Li Qingshan had already reached the highest peak of Haotian Taoism in the secular world. Yi Su's identity and strength did not shock him. What really shocked and worried him was that rumor had it that Yi Su would never set foot in the secular world. Why would he come to Chang'an and appear in front of the world? Fortunately, this person came to the Southern Gate Temple to meet him as soon as he entered Chang'an. Through this, Li Qingshan felt that the other party wanted to express his wish and was slightly relieved. I heard that the Tang Empire is very strict with the management of cultivators. Foreign cultivators have to register at the Imperial Center Administration when they enter Chang'an. I don't want to deal with those ordinary people, so I would like to trouble you to help me. Yi Su said calmly. Hearing this, Li Qingshan was slightly stunned. The law of the Tang Empire did stipulate that foreign cultivators had to register at the Imperial Center Administration when they entered Chang'an. Otherwise, they would be regarded as enemies by the Imperial Court of the Tang Empire. However, no matter how strict the law was, it still depended on who it was. It could only restrict those who could be restricted. How could it affect people like Yi Su? However, Yi Su did not seem to understand this. The first thing he did after coming to Chang'an was to ask the southern gate of Haotian to help him register. It sounded interesting, but there were some hidden meanings. Li Qingshan understood what he meant and said with a smile, I dare not disobey. The Taoists of the Southern Gate Temple would naturally handle such a trivial matter as registering at the Imperial Center Administration. Li Qingshan invited Yi Su into the temple to drink tea and wanted to find out the other party's intention. Yi Su said, I just came to Chang'an to travel. I don't want to alarm too many people or cause any misunderstanding. I will just stroll around in the next few days. After saying this, he turned around and left the Southern Gate Temple, walking towards the Vermilion Bird Avenue. On the long street in autumn, Yi Su's figure became fainter and fainter, as if he was about to melt into the autumn leaves. Li Qingshan looked at that place and frowned slightly. No one knew what he was thinking. That man came from the untouchable place. That man was a world wayfarer of Haotian Taoism. Although he said he did not want to alarm too many people, such a terrifying person strolling around in Chang'an was bound to alarm too many people. From today onwards, Chang'an was rarely peaceful. After leaving the Southern Gate Temple and walking on the Vermilion Bird Avenue, Yi Su followed the direction of the rolling leaves all the way to the south. Not long after, he arrived at the famous Vermilion Bird stone painting. He looked at the vivid vermilion bird painting on the ground and felt the hidden aura within it. He was silent for a long time. Even though he was in a high state, he could not help but admire the predecessor who built Chang'an 1,000 years ago and turned this magnificent city into a god-stunning array. Then he continued walking. Just as he said to Li Qingshan, he walked without any purpose. He walked completely according to his heart. He followed the hawkers, passed through the streets and alleys, looked at the kites and walked casually. When he was a little thirsty, he would borrow a ladle of water from the well at the entrance of the alley. He did not stop walking. In a very quiet street, he saw a simple Taoist temple. At the entrance of the Taoist temple, a Taoist priest was preaching the West Hill scriptures to the people. More than a dozen neighbors carried small stools and sat there listening attentively. From time to time, someone would raise their hand to ask about something they did not understand in the scriptures. Yi Su stood outside the crowd and listened quietly to the preaching of the doctrine. He felt that it was different from the preaching he had heard in other places in the world. Especially the questions and even doubts from the people who were listening from time to time made him feel very uncomfortable. He even felt a little disgusted and angry. A middle-aged man noticed him standing behind him. He saw that he was a little unfamiliar and thought that he was a tourist from another county. He stood up with great enthusiasm and invited him to sit down and listen. Yi Su was not used to the innate enthusiasm of the people of Chang'an. After a slight pause, he shook his head and declined. He looked expressionlessly at the Taoist priest who was stuttering on the stone steps. He watched as the Taoist priest stuttered in front of the people's harmless questions. His expression became a little ugly. To Yi Su, Haotian Taoism was his home and country. Even if the Southern Gate Temple was independent of the West Hill Divine Palace, it was still his place. That was why he went to see Li Qingshan as soon as he entered Chang'an. That was why when he traveled around the world, he would often hide his identity and visit various Taoist temples. In the Taoist temples of other countries, some Taoist priests might be greedy and stupid, but at least Haotian Taoism enjoyed supreme respect and glory. He had never seen a follower dare to ask a Taoist priest questions. He could not imagine that a follower would dare to doubt the records in the scriptures. Since he was a follower of Haotian, he should obey the scriptures and not doubt them. No matter whether the doubt was reasonable or not, as long as he began to doubt it, it would be blasphemy. This was Yi Su's opinion. A voice sounded beside him. "What's your opinion?" The speaker was a scholar in an old coat. The scholar's eyes were unusually clean and he had a water ladle tied to his waist. He did not hold the old book in his hand today. Yi Su looked at the scholar and was silent for a long time. Then he said, "This is Chang'an. My opinion is not as important as yours." This scholar was naturally the eldest brother of the academy. The eldest brother smiled and said, "If I remember correctly, this should be your first time in Chang'an. Since you are here, you should stay for a few more days. Perhaps you will have a different opinion after seeing more." Yi Su said, "I hope so too. 2 chapters tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 460. The Taoist priest on the stone steps gradually controlled the atmosphere and did not let the questions continue. He waved his arms and kept spitting saliva, reciting the profound words in the scriptures. His expression was sometimes solemn, sometimes passionate, sometimes compassionate, and sometimes stern. The dozen neighbors who were listening to him were very focused. Their bodies leaned forward and backward from time to time. They could not help covering their mouths and listening to the Haotian miracles that had been discovered somewhere. They could not help but feel sympathy and yearning for the martyrs. No one noticed the existence of eldest brother and Yi Su. Although they were the greatest figures in the academy in Haotian Taoism, there was nothing special about them on the surface. After a brief conversation, the two formally greeted each other. Yi Su stood with one hand in front of his chest and the other clenched fist against the edge of his palm. He looked calm and slightly lowered his head, saying, "Greetings, Mr. First." Eldest brother kept his composure and returned the greeting seriously, "Greetings, Mr. Yi." Yi Su said, "I thought Mr. Second would be the first to appear." Eldest brother smiled and said, "My teacher was worried that Jun Mo would come and destroy Chang'an City, so he imprisoned him in the back mountain." Hearing the word teacher, Yi Su thought of the headmaster of the academy who was admired by countless people in the cultivation world. After a moment of silence, he said seriously, "I wonder if I have the chance to meet the headmaster of the academy?" Eldest brother said, "I will ask my teacher." Yi Su said, "Thank you, Mr. First." Eldest brother looked into his eyes and suddenly asked, "Are you here to see Chang'an or Xiaofan?" Yi Su said, "Xiaofan is an elder of the Divine Hall after all, and it was my teacher who personally led him to the Divine Hall. He has done a great service to Haotian Taoism. Although he once had some delusions in the wilderness, it does not make up for his contributions. Haotian Taoism hopes to see him have a good ending. I think the Tang Emperor and his ministers also do not want to see a dog being cooked." Eldest brother said gently, "There is no such thing in the academy. Contributions are contributions, and mistakes are mistakes. One must bear the responsibility. However, since General Xiaofan is willing to return peacefully, I think no one will stop him. Moreover, he is a powerhouse at the peak of martial arts. Who can stop him?" Yi Su said, "Xiaofan is old, and he was seriously injured by the Tang. I know this, and I think the headmaster and Mr. First should be even more aware of it. If he was still the Xiaofan of the past, why would my master send a message for me to come to Chang'an to take a look? Or is it that Mr. First doesn't welcome me?" Eldest brother said, the Tang Empire is an open-minded country. Chang'an welcomes anyone. Yi Su looked at the commoner who gave up his stool to him and said, the Tang Empire is indeed different from other countries. The main thing is the atmosphere. Eldest brother smiled and said, I hope you can enjoy your stay in Chang'an. Not very pleasant, said Yi Su. If an ordinary tourist met a black-hearted shopkeeper in Chang'an or ate an extremely expensive vegetarian meal in Wanyan Tower Temple, he might be very unhappy, but it would not have any impact on the world. Yi Su had just arrived in Chang'an, and his unhappiness seemed unreasonable. However, he was a world wayfarer of Haotian Taoism, and his unhappiness might bring some unhappiness to Chang'an. Hearing him say that he was unhappy, even eldest brother's expression gradually became solemn. He asked seriously, what's the matter? Yi Su looked at the Taoist priest on the stone steps of the Taoist temple and said, this place is not pleasant. Eldest brother turned around and silently listened to the Taoist priest's preaching for a while. After listening to the neighbor's questions, he roughly understood where Yi Su's unhappiness came from. For thousands of years, the Jishou Abbey had always been very dissatisfied with the preaching of Haotian Taoism in the Tang Empire. However, these things were handled by the South School of Haotian Taoism, especially since the Tang Empire had the Academy and the Iron Cavalry. Therefore, the West Hill Divine Palace had never been able to make a deeper impact. However, when a proud son of Haotian like Yi Su suddenly heard a discussion in a remote alley of Chang'an that was completely different from the rest of the world, he was naturally unhappy. Eldest brother said, believing in Haotian doesn't mean believing in Haotian Taoism, and it doesn't mean that you can't raise your own questions about the teachings of the West Hill Divine Palace. Yi Su quietly looked at the scholar in front of him. He had seen him by the Hulun Sea, but it was not a chance for them to have a long and peaceful conversation on the city wall of Chang'an unlike today. Therefore, he looked carefully and seriously, trying to understand why this person could sit on the other side of the line. He thought he had already understood some parts. What about you people from the academy? Yi Su looked at eldest brother's eyes and said calmly, I can understand you. I know that you don't even believe in Haotian. So do you think that you can even doubt Haotian? Eldest brother smiled slightly and did not deny or defend himself. Yi Su also smiled. His smile seemed indifferent and cold. He said, there is indeed a group of terrible people living in the academy. You should not exist at all. Eldest brother sincerely asked, why do you say so? Yi Su looked into his eyes and said in a low and cold voice, there is no reverence if there is no faith. Those who do not know reverence will naturally not care about the torrential flood. Yi Su thought for a moment, and then walked into the crowd. Eldest senior brother smiled faintly and followed. There is one more chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for it and vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 461. The eldest brother and Yi Su walked to the stone steps and whispered to the Taoist. The Taoist was a little surprised and unhappy, especially when he clenched his right fist in his sleeve and waited for a long time without receiving any money. He was even more dissatisfied. However, when he looked at the Taoist bun on Yi Su's head, the Taoist found that he had lost all courage to stop them and could only remain silent. The dozen or so neighbors who came to the small Taoist temple to listen to the preaching of the scriptures were immersed in the historical story told by the Taoist. They occasionally questioned but still listened with great interest. At this time, they suddenly found that the preaching was interrupted and two people stood in front of the Taoist. They could not help but be surprised. Yi Su's face was expressionless. For him, if it was not for the ideological battle with Mr. First of the Academy, he had no interest in talking to these ordinary people in this chaotic world. Next, I will explain the essence of the three essentials of Haotian Taoism. Then he looked at the eldest brother and said, Mr. First is welcome to ask any questions. The eldest brother nodded calmly. Yi Su began to talk about his understanding of Haotian Taoism. The eldest brother occasionally raised his doubts. One was the world wayfarer of Haotian Taoism and the successor of the Jisho Abbey. He studied the scriptures of Haotian Taoism since he was a child and later traveled to many countries. He broke through the barrier of life and death and had a deep understanding of morality. He was the most outstanding person in the world. The other was Mr. First of the Academy, the first disciple of the headmaster of the Academy. He was well versed in the 6 arts and had followed the headmaster of the Academy to travel around the world. His state was unfathomable. Although his words and actions were slow, he was the most intelligent person. At this moment, they were debating with each other in front of the crowd. Naturally, the two of them weren't as calm and direct as they were when they were talking in private. Both of them looked for evidence from the ancient books and notes of famous experts, and they looked for comrades. Their words were brief but not comprehensive, and then they became profound. Every word they said contained an extremely deep meaning. No matter how one looked at it, the debate between Mr. First of the Academy and Yi Su, the successor of the Jisho Abbey, was undoubtedly a legendary event that was destined to be recorded in history. If the people of the cultivation world were to find out about this, they would definitely be shocked to the extreme. In order to be able to participate in such a grand event, to be able to hear the voices of these two experts that were only above the clouds, even if they were on the verge of death, they would still call for their disciples to carry them over on stretchers to listen respectfully. Although he was still far from the state and means of his master Yen Sei, his mind had gradually connected with Chang'an City, and he could perceive everything this magnificent city wanted to tell him. Ning Ke sensed that a peerless powerhouse had entered Chang'an. At this moment, it was the moment when Yi Su entered Chang'an with the grain team from other counties. Ning Ke did not know that the powerhouse who had come to Chang'an was Yi Su. He only knew that the other party was very strong, so strong that the array pestle began to slightly heat up. He could not help but have a very strong sense of vigilance in his eyes. He said to the black horse in front of the carriage, "Turn around and go to the academy." Ning Ke turned to the academy because he was very clear that with his state and strength, he could not deal with the powerhouse who had come to Chang'an. In addition, in fact, he also used this as an excuse to ask his teacher some questions. Some questions that the academy had never discussed but had always been like firewood in his heart. After entering the back of the mountain of the academy, Ning Ke heard the sound of the waterfall and came to the hut. Ning Ke did not see the headmaster. It was obvious that the headmaster did not want to answer his questions, so he did not want to see him. Then he left the hut, bypassed the waterfall and came to the precipice. He slowly walked along the steep stone path hidden in the precipice and returned to the cliff cave where he had lived for 3 months. The wisteria on the roofed corridor had long withered. The wisteria fruits were not stewed by Sang Sang, but became food for the ants on the ground. Standing on the edge of the cliff, Ning Ke looked at the sea of clouds in front of him and Chang'an on the other side of the sea of clouds. He was silent for a long time, analyzing the headmaster's attitude by avoiding to see him. After an unknown period of time, eldest brother walked to his side and looked at the distant Chang'an city. He said, "The person who came is Yi Su." Ning Ke had already felt that the person who entered Chang'an city was a peerless powerhouse, so he was not surprised to hear Yi Su's name. Eldest brother looked at him and suddenly said, "Everything in the past, such as yesterday's death." Ning Ke knew that eldest brother was trying to persuade him. He did not want to say anything, but when he looked at the distant Chang'an city shrouded in the autumn sunshine, he suddenly had the idea to say something. "But I did not die yesterday. They all died." Between the precipice, the autumn wind blew and the clouds moved. The silver thread-like waterfalls between the precipice became thinner than in spring because of the decreasing water volume. Eldest brother looked at the waterfall between the precipice and said, if a person is blinded by hatred, then he will not be able to see the wider world and the more beautiful scenery. Ning Ke said, hatred cannot blind one's eyes. It can only make one's eyes red. For me, hatred has already become my eyes. All these years, I have not seen anything else. Revenge is my world and my most beautiful scenery. Eldest brother said, is it really worth living such an uncomfortable life? Ning Ke turned to look at him and said, Senior brother, you are wrong. If people want to live freely, they should not think too much. They should do whatever they want to do. That is true freedom. In this state of mind, I still wrote it. Speechlessly and bitterly. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 462. Standing on the edge of the cliff and looking at the clouds, Ning Ke rarely said such serious words. At first, he hesitated because he was talking to the eldest brother, but then it became smoother and smoother. What others don't want me to do, what the law of the Tang Empire forbids me to do, and what morality forbids me to do, does it have anything to do with me? The eldest brother shook his head and said, but, there is no absolute freedom in the world. Everything, even the spirit, has its limits. If your freedom interferes with the freedom of others, or even the whole world is not free, then no one will let you be free. Ning Ke said, but you should have as much as you can. The eldest brother was puzzled and asked, why do you have to have more? Ning Ke said, these things are no different from silver. They are all good things. Since they are good things, of course, the more the better. I don't believe in the saying that it is better to have nothing than to have too much. The eldest brother said, but it requires absolute power. If you want to have the whole world, you need to have the power to match it. I have never seen such a person in my life. Ning Ke said, Senior brother, you are right. That is why we cultivate and why we become stronger. The eldest brother's voice was slightly bitter and he said helplessly, that is not what I mean. Ning Ke said with a smile, although we can't achieve it, we must yearn for it. The eldest brother looked at him and said, you want to have absolute freedom, but you don't have the power to match it. That is why you came back to the academy today. Do you want to see the headmaster? Ning Ke looked at the clouds on the edge of the cliff and said, I don't know what I will ask the headmaster if I see him. But since the headmaster doesn't want to see me, I have to think about these questions myself. Eldest brother thought of what Yi Su had said in front of the small Taoist temple in Chang'an. He also thought of the black line in the past. He looked at Ning Ke's thoughtful face and could not help but sigh softly. He felt that the mountain wind passing through the cliffs suddenly became a little cold. Different people have different freedom. Once these freedoms conflict with each other, there will be disputes. The law of the Tang Empire or the West Hill scriptures are the rules to solve these disputes. He looked at Ning Ke and said calmly, the Academy believes that the law of the Tang Empire is the most important thing in order to prevent the world from falling into chaos. No one can violate it, not even me. And as a disciple of the Academy, I will take the initiative to maintain the dignity of the law of the Tang Empire. I hope you can clearly understand this. Ning Ke was not surprised to hear eldest brother's warning and nodded. Eldest brother looked at him and suddenly asked curiously, what are you going to do next? Ning Ke cultivated silently by the Yanming Lake, waiting for the arrival of winter. One day, the yellow leaves fell like rain. Ning Ke sat under a balding tree, and his knees were full of withered leaves. Yi Hongyu put down the scroll in her hand and looked at him. She said, even if you hide the fact that you have joined the devil until the end and turn it into a trump card, you can only scare Xia Ho and not kill him. Ning Ke looked at her and said, I don't know what you are talking about. Fight and then win. You can change victory to victory. This was Lin Hai's original words. He posted it on Weibo. I liked it very much, so I stole it. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 463. Since it was not a human language, he naturally could not understand it. Although Yi Hongyu spoke with a southern accent, it was a standard Central Plains language. Ning Kei said that she was talking nonsense. It was not that he could not understand it, but he had to pretend not to understand it at this moment. He looked calm and even had a hint of doubt. But in fact, after hearing about joining the devil, his body had become as stiff as a block of wood. His heart seemed to have stopped beating. Yi Hongyu closed the book on the table so that the autumn wind would not disturb the paper sword in the book. She looked at him sitting under the tree and said, "If you become an actor, you can also earn money." Ning Kei felt that she was very boring and waved his hand to ignore her. Yi Hongyu picked up the book and walked to the tree. She looked at him and said, "You and I have fought so many times in the house by the lake. Do you think that I can't tell the difference between the aura of heaven and earth condensed on the surface of a martial arts powerhouse and the genuine qi in the body of the remnants of the devil's doctrine? Do you really think that I will believe that you really cultivated talisman and martial arts in the cliff cave of the academy in the spring? Or do you think that I am an idiot?" The Tao addict was naturally not an idiot. At this point, there was no point in pretending not to understand. Ning Kei remembered that the headmaster had once told him that youngest uncle had never let the enemy's weapon touch his clothes after joining the devil. He could not help but mock himself and think that his state was indeed too low. He raised his head and looked at Yi Hongyu. He said, "Even if you have guessed something, you should know that I will not admit anything. So there is no point in trying to test me with words." Yi Hongyu said, "I just don't understand. During the second half of the trip to the wilderness, you were always in my sight. When did you pick up the cultivation method of the devil's doctrine?" She looked down at him and continued expressionlessly, "What I want to know is, where did the devil's doctrine genuine qi in your body come from? Master Lotus, or Mr. Ku?" Ning Kei shook his head and said, "I don't understand what you are saying." Yi Hongyu frowned slightly and said, "Why are you still pretending at this point?" Ning Kei said, "There are some things that need to be pretended until the end. Although you have been expelled from the West Hill Divine Palace, you have said that you will dedicate your life to Haotian. So why do you think that I will be stupid enough to admit anything in front of you and be remembered by you?" Yi Hongyu looked at him and said sarcastically, "Are you afraid?" Ning Kei said, "Although I haven't seen much about the West Hill Divine Palace's attitude towards the remnants of the devil's doctrine, especially the horrible means of the judicial department, I know a lot about it." Chapter 464. Yi Su had been cultivating in the Jishou Abbey since he was a child. After that, he traveled around many countries and saw that Haotian Taoism was highly respected. He always thought that it was natural and never thought that faith could be understood in such a way. He wanted to kill this blasphemous Taoist with one slap. However, he suddenly thought that although the skinny Taoist's words were unpleasant, he could not find anything wrong with them if he thought about it carefully. So he kept silent for a long time. The sparrows at the bottom of the stone steps woke up because of the stifling atmosphere. They chirped twice, flapped their wings, and ran away to hide in the shadows of the autumn trees. Yi Su woke up from his silence and looked at the skinny Taoist expressionlessly. He said, "Please continue." The skinny Taoist looked at him and smiled. He said, "In fact, at least 90% of the Tangs are believers of Haotian Taoism. However, they are different from the believers in the South Jin Kingdom and the Kingdom of Song. They do not have the patience to participate in missionary activities. Therefore, if you want to strengthen their faith in Haotian, missionary activities are not the best way. Yi Su said, then what method should I use? The skinny Taoist said, the people of Haotian Taoism value morality, so they pay attention to the consistency of their words and actions. However, for missionary activities, words are never as good as actions. As the master of the abbey, if you can get close to your neighbors and take the initiative to help them when they are in trouble, such as carrying water and drying food for them, then through your daily words and actions, you can show Haotians kindness and love. This is the most effective way to teach the Tangs. Yi Su was deep in thought. The skinny Taoist patted his shoulder with his empty hand and said, other than the great divine priest of West Hill, not many people can witness Haotian's miracles. Ordinary Taoists like us are the representatives of Haotian in the world. If ordinary people want to feel Haotian, they have to feel us. Yi Su was enlightened and said, that makes sense. The skinny Taoist sighed and said, it has been 23 years since I left West Hill. Although the Tang Empire is not as glorious as other countries, I am happy to guard this small Taoist temple. I heard that in other countries, the Taoists are tyrannical and the envoys sent by the Divine Hall are even more arrogant and extravagant. How can people truly respect Haotian? The only thing left is fear. Those Taoists are not the representatives of Haotian, they are the shame of Haotian. Yi Su did not want to discuss the affairs of Haotian Taoism in the secular world. He looked at the bowl of noodles in his hand and said, if you don't eat, the noodles will get cold. Only then did the skinny Taoist remember that he had a bowl of noodles in his hand. He quickly handed it to him and said, this is for you. If you don't eat your fill, you won't have the strength to preach. Yi Su quietly looked at the bowl of noodles in his hand and suddenly said, I'll try your method. A drop of rain suddenly fell into the bowl of noodle soup. Yi Su and the skinny Taoist looked up and saw raindrops falling from the sky. An autumn rain fell without warning. The late autumn rain was out of everyone's expectations. The intensity of the rain was even more rare. Some of the neighbors next to the small Taoist temple thought that the rainy season was over, so they didn't repair their roofs. The sudden attack of the rain caused the roof to leak. After eating the noodles, the autumn rain gradually stopped. The skinny Taoist brought Yi Su and two little Taoist boys to the street and began to help the neighbors to drain the water and repair the roof. Yi Su had done many things, such as freezing the world with a sword, laughing at the messengers of the underworld in his life, and ignoring all the trifles of the secular world above the clouds. However, he had never repaired the roof damaged by the autumn rain. So when he climbed up the stairs to the roof and began to clean and replace the black tiles, his movements seemed a little clumsy. However, he was after all the first person in the younger generation of Haotian Taoism. His sister Yi Hongyu, whom he ignored indifferently, was known as the Tao addict in the West Hill Divine Palace. So he became more and more skilled in removing the tiles and wiping the oars, and his speed became faster and faster. The neighbors below the wooden ladder who were responsible for helping him changed from 1 to 4, but they still couldn't keep up with his speed. Gradually, in the streets after the autumn rain, people subconsciously surrounded him. They looked at the flying tiles on the street and watched him smear the mortar like he was painting mountains and rivers. They let out exclamations from time to time. Hearing the exclamations and exclamations from time to time in the streets, Yi Su's face was expressionless. He didn't feel proud because of this, because this kind of thing wasn't difficult at all. He only calmly and silently removed the tiles and smeared the mortar. He just did it casually, just like what he did in the past. The puddles on the street evaporated into steam by the autumn sun, shrouding the houses. The trees that had lost most of their leaves dozed off in boredom by the street. People looked at the secular Taoist from the small Taoist temple on the eaves and enjoyed the scene in front of them, so they didn't notice the scene on the street. A plump figure walked out of the water vapor formed by the rainwater. Chen Pipi walked along the stone street, stepping on the rainwater, and walked to the periphery of the crowd. He looked up and squinted at the figure on the eaves. It didn't take long for him to recognize the person's face. His originally half-squinted eyes suddenly opened wide, the rims of his eyes red, and tears flowed down. He looked at Yi Su on the roof and shouted in a trembling voice, "Senior brother." Yi Su was on the roof, using bamboo ropes to tie some wooden sticks that had been separated from the eaves. Hearing the voice from outside the crowd below, he slowly turned his head. He looked at the fat young man outside the crowd, and an extremely sincere smile appeared on his usually emotionless face. He said happily, "You've come?" Chen Pipi looked at Yi Su on the roof and said with tears streaming down his face, "Senior brother, what happened to you? Have you also been expelled from Taoism? Is that person really so cruel?" Yi Su's expression was slightly stiff, as if he had become a gecko on the roof that had been dried by the sun. Chen Pipi was still sad, looking at him with tears streaming down his face. Then he noticed that senior brother Yi Su's left foot on the wooden ladder didn't seem to touch the surface of the ladder at all. Then he noticed that the clear sunlight after the rain sprinkled on Yi Su's light white robe, emitting a very faint and clean luster, like the luster of jade. Chen Pipi then realized that senior brother's state was much higher than when he was in the temple. What shocked him even more was that senior brother was in some kind of turning point at this moment. The small Taoist temple was facing the street, with an archway and eaves, and there was a shadow in the sunlight after the rain. The two stood in the shadow. Yi Su looked at Chen Pipi's round face and let out a sigh in his heart. Chen Pipi looked at the faint luster on senior brother's body, suppressing the shock and fear in his heart, and said in a trembling voice, "Senior brother, what medicine did you take to get into such a situation?" "I have been keeping the heavenly power pill. If you really want to try to break the realm, you must tell me first, don't eat it blindly. In the path of cultivation, the further one went, the more difficult it would be. Just like climbing a dangerous peak, the last few steps were always the most difficult distance." As the successor of Jishou Abbey, Yi Su had already walked to the deepest part of the path of cultivation more than 10 years ago. It was easier said than done to go further on this foundation. So when Chen Pipi looked at Yi Su on the roof, who was stepping on the wooden ladder as if he was stepping on flowing clouds, and his robe was faintly shining, he thought that Yi Su must have taken a shortcut. Of course, Yi Su did not take medicine, not even the most precious pills of Jishou Abbey. Because since the beginning of cultivation, he had always believed that once a cultivator relied on the assistance of external forces, then he would never have a chance to reach the real shore in his life. It was not until Chen Pipi said it twice in a row that he realized something was wrong. Standing in the shadow of the small Taoist temple, Yi Su silently looked at the houses and markets near and far. He silently felt his Taoist heart, and found that his state, which had been rigid for more than 10 years, actually trembled and a crack appeared. He could not help but be shocked speechless. Chang'an was indeed not an ordinary city. At this moment, the nameless small Taoist temple welcomed another guest. This guest was a young girl in a green Taoist robe. Yi Hongyu looked at her brother on the stone steps, and her body trembled uncontrollably. Then, her eyes turned red, and 2 streaks of tears flowed down her beautiful face silently. Yi Su looked at his sister under the stone steps and frowned slightly. He said with some disgust, "Why are you crying?" Yi Hongyu's clear eyes overflowed with more tears, but she did not reach out to wipe them away. Instead, she looked at him stubbornly and discontentedly and said, "When he cries, you are moved. When I cry, you scold me." Yi Su's frown deepened a little. The only thing that could compare to Haotian's divine light was a human's vision, which could focus on one point and illuminate the world she wanted to see. Yi Hongyu looked at her brother with grievance and stubbornness, like a little girl who was scolded by her brother for stealing her roasted sweet potato. Her gaze fell on Chen Pipi, full of hatred. Chen Pipi lowered his head even more obediently. Yi Su looked at her coldly and said, "Who are you? How dare you stare at my younger brother so rudely? If you do this again, I will dig your eyes out." Yi Hongyu did not seem to hear what he said. She still looked at Chen Pipi with hatred, as if she was looking at a dead man. However, her eyes were not dug out, because Chen Pipi, who was extremely guilty, spoke at the right time and dissolved the awkwardness in front of the stone steps of the small Taoist temple. Yi Su looked at Chen Pipi and said with a smile, "I haven't seen my teacher for some time. I think he should still be in the South Sea. As for why I came to Chang'an, there is naturally another reason." Chen Pipi asked curiously, "Senior brother, what reason?" Yi Su said, "I came to see Xia Ho." After a short pause, he looked at Chen Pipi and said calmly, "And also to see Ning Quebec." He was the successor of Jishou Abbey and a world wayfarer of Haotian Taoism. Now he did not cultivate outside the world, but stepped into the mortal world and came to Chang'an for such a simple reason. If the rumor was true. If Ning Ke was really the son of Xianwei General Lin Guangyuan, then he was very likely to be the son of Yama that the divine priest of light had mentioned. Although Haotian Taoism denied the divine priest of light's opinion more than a decade ago, and the bloody storm did not last until the end, Yi Su did not believe it. Because he was on the other side of the black line that year when the omen appeared. "A friend has come from afar. I want to receive him." The newly bought bricks and wood can only build a new Taoist temple. Once the old is destroyed, it cannot be returned. There is no such thing as rebirth in this world. There is only a new life. After saying this, his expression stiffened. He stood in the ruins and did not move anymore. Yi Su did not know why this small Taoist temple that had already been reduced to ruins could make him feel such emotions and say such words unconsciously. He only knew that ever since he traveled through many countries and broke through the barrier of life and death, his state had become perfect. His state that was as calm as a mountain showed signs of loosening after the slight tremors earlier. The skinny Taoist did not know his current state. Seeing that he was silent, he thought that he did not want to cause trouble. He could not help but feel even more angry. He wiped away his tears and brought the Taoist child to the ruins, hoping to find something useful. The collapse of the small Taoist temple caused quite a commotion. The neighbors quickly rushed over. Looking at the tragic scene of the ruins, they discussed in low voices and returned to their houses to get tools to help. Many of the neighbors' houses were damaged by the storm. However, they thought of the skinny Taoist's old age and the Taoist child's weak body. How could they care about their own matters? The previously tragic Taoist temple suddenly became a bustling construction site. Although it was impossible to rebuild a Taoist temple in such a short period of time, the loud chants and the laughter of the people seemed to indicate that the small Taoist temple would be restored to its original state in the near future. The skinny Taoist wiped away his tears and bowed in thanks. His face was full of sincere smiles. It was almost dusk. Yi Su woke up. He looked at the ordinary figures in front of him who were busy. He looked at the smiles on their faces and thought of the words the skinny Taoist had said. He was deep in thought. The skinny Taoist walked in front of him and glared at him. He wanted to scold him but subconsciously did not dare to. He thought of what the skinny Taoist said when the Taoist temple collapsed and could not help but rub his hands nervously. He asked, "Are you really willing to pay?" Yi Su looked at him and said seriously, "If you are willing, I can build a divine hall for you. Tomorrow is Saturday off. I wish everyone a happy weekend." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. In the future, when this gets out, it will be a good story for the Ning family. Yi Hongyu frowned even more and sat down without saying a word. Looking at her expression, Ning Ke guessed that she was in a bad mood, but he did not restrain himself and continued, speaking of which, I thought your brother would at least treat you to a meal. Yi Hongyu looked at him quietly and said, it seems that you plan to live a long life in Chang'an. But have you ever thought that the world will not allow you to live like this? Ning Ke smiled and said, I am a Tang and a disciple of the second floor of the academy. I can't imagine who would be stupid enough to disturb my life. What if you are the son of Hades? Yi Hongyu looked at him, her bright eyes full of mockery and coldness. Ning Ke was slightly startled. In the conversation a few days ago, Yi Hongyu directly exposed the fact that he had joined the devil, and now she mentioned such a possible fact so casually. I really don't know what you are talking about, he said. Yi Hongyu said, if the rumors are true, and you are the son of the Xianwei general of the Tang Empire, then you are the dark shadow that the divine priest of light saw in the eyes of the divine priest of light. Now, there are probably few people who still remember that incident, but how can I forget it? Do you believe it? Ning Ke looked into her eyes and asked seriously. Yi Hongyu thought for a while and shook her head. Ning Ke relaxed slightly and said, why don't you believe it? Yi Hongyu said, it's true. Ning Ke raised his right thumb and praised sincerely, you have the best intuition. Come, come, come. Please eat some mutton giblets. I have some hidden in the kitchen, just to show my respect to you. Yi Hongyu did not smile. She looked at him and said, I don't believe it, but it doesn't mean that the Divine Hall doesn't believe it. My brother appeared in Chang'an to pay attention to Xiaofan, but I believe that he actually came to see you. Ning Ke shook his head and said, I have heard some things. Sang also learned some secrets from Wei Guangming. Since the West Hill Divine Palace stopped this matter and imprisoned Wei Guangming for more than 10 years, it means that Haotian Taoism does not believe in the story of the son of Yama. Even if the Divine Hall doesn't believe it, it doesn't mean that the Buddhism sect doesn't believe it. Yi Hongyu said. Ning Ke thought of the two sadhus he met on the streets of Chang'an that spring morning. They were Master Daoshe from the Xiankong Temple in the unknown place. He thought of the conversation he had with the stone Buddha in front of the lonely grave in the spiritual world, especially the obscure parts of the conversation. He could not help but frown and remain silent. Let's not talk about these boring things. Let's eat mutton giblets first. He looked at Yi Hongyu and smiled. He said, mutton giblets must be eaten while it's hot. His Majesty the Tang Emperor would once again reward him for his meritorious service and give him the honor of a family banquet. Then, all the civil and military officials of the imperial court would send him away from Chang'an. On this day, the small Taoist temple was finally rebuilt. Yi Su carefully combed his Taoist bun and stood behind the skinny Taoist, like a tacky receptionist in a village wedding. He thanked the neighbors who came to attend the ceremony, and then moved the chicken, duck, and wine in the hands of the neighbors to the back kitchen. On this day, third sister Yu Lian smiled and said to Tang Xiaotang by the low table by the east window of the old library in the back of the mountain of the academy. White mist rose in the iron forging room by the mirror lake, and seventh sister was embroidering in the pavilion in the middle of the lake. Everything was calm as usual, but the shadow of the tall hat that looked like a washing stick could no longer be seen in the green pond under the waterfall. Eldest brother was not in the back of the mountain either, but had gone to Chang'an as a guest. Eldest brother walked up the stone steps and looked at Yi Su with a smile. He said, "Congratulations." Yi Su looked at the renovated Taoist temple behind him and the roofs of the neighbors that he had personally repaired not far away. He showed a sincere smile and said, "Thank you, Mr. First." The people in the house by the Yanming Lake had also woken up. Ning Ke took a bath with the help of Sang and changed into a brand new black academy uniform. He carefully tied up his hair and put on a flat hat. He suddenly looked much more energetic. Sang also took a bath and then cut her hair short with a pair of scissors. She carefully combed a small braid and carefully powdered her hair in front of the bronze mirror. She even drew her eyebrows. Very beautiful. Ning Kei looked at the refreshing little girl in the mirror and said with a smile. Sang Sang stood up from the stool and turned around to tidy up his academy uniform. She took off the thread on his shoulder and said, "Today is our big day. We should be serious." Walking out of the bedroom, Ning Kei snapped his fingers and summoned the big black horse who had been eating wintersweet in the corner of the garden. He gently patted the horse's rump and said, "Go back to the academy by yourself." The big black horse slightly raised its head and felt a little confused. However, it was not a human after all. Even if it had doubts, it could not say it. It could only obey and ran out of the house and along the long street out of the city. Yi Hongyu was not the big black horse. She stood under the tree at the gate of the garden and looked at the master and servant who were wearing new clothes. Suddenly she pointed to the sky above the courtyard and said calmly, "It will snow heavily today. Do you still want to go out?" Dark clouds floated in the dark sky. The clouds were as heavy as mountains and it seemed that it would snow at any time. Ning Kei looked up at the sky and said, "Rain can keep people, but snow can't. After holding it in for a day, I just couldn't write it. Just when I was about to ask for leave, I thank Lin Hai, Ting Tao, and Butterfly Blue for their encouragement. I finally succeeded in defeating myself. Thank them, and thank you all. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 467. Yi Hongyu said, "You can't keep people in the snow, so you want to keep people here?" Ning Kei said, "I don't understand what you mean." Yi Hongyu asked, "Why did you dismiss all the stewards and maids last night?" Ning Kei said with a smile, "Doesn't this prove that I didn't keep anyone here?" Yi Hongyu said, "You know what I mean." Ning Kei said, "Today is the winter solstice. The stewards and maids should spend more time with their families." Yi Hongyu said, "Then why do you want me to leave? Don't tell me that you haven't given up on assassinating Xiaofan. You are going to do it now." Ning Kei asked, "Are you worried about my life?" Yi Hongyu shook her head. Ning Kei said with a smile, "Although it sounds sad, this is the real you. Since you are not worried about my life, why do you care what I do? Xiaofan is a visiting professor of Haotian Taoism. My brother came to Chang'an for this. He will not allow you to ruin it, and neither will I. So if you want to do it, I will keep you here." Yi Hongyu looked at him and said calmly. Her right hand was about to hold a virtual sword in the winter wind. Ning Kei looked at her right hand and said after a long silence, "It seems that everyone in the world, including my sect, does not agree with me assassinating Xiaofan." He raised his head and looked into Yi Hongyu's eyes quietly. He said, "You know what kind of person I am. I can't defeat Xiaofan, so I won't think about killing him. I want you to leave because I want to tell you that Yisu's Taoist temple is reopening today. Since it's the winter solstice, you should go there." Yi Hongyu said, "You haven't said whether you are going to assassinate Xiaofan." Ning Kei said, "I swear on the headmaster's character that I have never thought about assassinating Xiaofan." Yi Hongyu's expression did not change. She said, "Change your name." Ning Kei said, "If I assassinate Xiaofan, then Sang Sang and I can never be together." Yi Hongyu was startled. She did not expect him to make such a promise. She frowned and asked, "Then why do you two care so much about today?" Ning Kei said, "We are going to the House of Red Sleeves to eat haggis soup." Yi Hongyu was silent. Her green robe fluttered slightly and she disappeared into the depths of the plum tree. The big black horse chewed on the fragrant plum blossoms and left Yanming Lake, running out of the city. The soldiers stationed at the south gate of Chang'an City had already been warned by the Fish Dragon gang and knew the origin of the Black Horse. They did not stop it and just watched it disappear on the cold winter road outside the city. It didn't take long for the big black horse to run back to the academy. It stepped on the slope from the side door and entered the clouds. It appeared by the mirror lake on the cliff plateau of the back mountain. It kept panting and lowered its head to kiss itself on the surface of the lake. According to the rules, it was very inappropriate for the Empress to be alone with a general of the empire. However, this was His Majesty's order, and no one dared to object. The Empress quietly looked at her brother below and sighed softly. She said, "Will he be all right?" Xiaofan looked at her, and on his usual dark and indifferent face, there was a very rare warm and pampering smile. He said, "We are going back to our hometown. Nothing will happen. I feel relaxed like never before. Sister, you will be alone in Chang'an City from now on. You must be careful. If anything goes wrong, inform me as soon as possible." The Empress smiled and said, "Judging from the movements in the academy, it should be peaceful. This was originally the agreement between Mr. First and me. I think the headmaster of the academy also has the same attitude. As for Ning Ke, we all know what kind of person he is. Of course, it will be peaceful." Xiaofan frowned slightly and forcibly suppressed the increasingly irritating cough in his chest. He did not want to let his sister worry about him after leaving Chang'an. The Empress silently looked at his face. Her gentle gaze seemed to be able to penetrate deep into his body. She looked at the injury in his lungs and faintly said, "In the wilderness, Tang caused you such a serious injury. I think he must not have had a good time. Why didn't you take the opportunity to kill him at that time?" Xiaofan coughed softly and said, "He can hurt me, and I can hurt him. It is all natural. However, if I want to kill him, I need to sacrifice more lives. Those cavalries in the wilderness are all loyal subordinates who have followed me for many years. Why should I let them exchange their lives?" Hearing this, the Empress's expression became more and more gentle. She comforted him and said, "Brother, you have changed a lot. Not as cold, violent, and murderous as before." Xiaofan laughed at himself. He thought that when he and his sister left the wilderness and came to the Tang Empire, they did not have any background. His Majesty had not yet ascended the throne, and she was not the Empress. What else could they do if they wanted to gain a foothold in such a big empire but to make all their enemies feel terrified? It was winter. Snow fell from the sky like powder, coating the red walls of the palace with a thin layer of powder. The square in front of the side hall was covered with snow, as if it would not stop. Xiaofan silently looked at the cold snow outside the hall. He could not help but think of the snow-like ashes on his hands after he snatched the iron box from Ning Ke in the north of the Hulun Sea. Then, he seemed to hear some whimpering sounds in the deepest part of the wind and snow. It was not the whistling of the north wind, but the chirping of cicadas. He knew it was an auditory hallucination, but his face still became a little ugly. Decades ago, he left Tianqi Mountain and went south to the Tang Empire. Fortunately, there was not much of the smell of Yen Sei's stinky feet. Sang Sang sat at the head of the bed, took a wet towel and put it on his forehead. She knew very well that Ning Ke was pretending to be drunk, so she declined Dewdrop's suggestion to make soup to sober him up. Ning Ke did not dream in his tipsy state. He did not see the darkness in the distance, did not see the three extremely cold black smoke, and did not see the infinite light in the sky above his head. He just sank his consciousness into his sense of perception, all the way to the deepest bottom of the sea, and picked up those fragments of consciousness to feel them silently. These fragments of consciousness were obtained after the bloody battle with Lotus at the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine last year. Before Master Lotus died, he forcibly transferred these fragments of consciousness into his sense of perception. Since then, he had been carefully feeling them, but he did not gain any concrete results. However, he knew that these fragments of consciousness were very important, at least to him. Because in the north of the Hulun Sea, it was with these fragments of consciousness that he instinctively made a very effective dodge when facing Xia Ho's mighty iron fist. He seemed to be able to guess Xia Ho's thoughts during the battle. Drunk and lying on the warm bed, Ning Kei's right hand unconsciously fell on his waist. There were a few hard things in his belt, the waist token of the academy, and some other waist tokens. These waist tokens in his belt seemed to give him some spiritual comfort, making his consciousness in his sense of perception become more and more peaceful and clear. At this time, he still did not have enough state to fully understand the deep meaning of the fragments of consciousness left by Master Lotus. However, he already understood how important these fragments of consciousness would be in the battle with Xia Ho. At the Yanming Lake, Yi Hongyu once said that grand cultivators who entered the knowing destiny state could sense the slightest changes in the qi of heaven and earth. All the means of their opponents could not surpass their experience and perception. This kind of battle consciousness was the most terrifying part of the knowing destiny state powerhouses. Ning Kei was now in the upper state of see-through. If he wanted to fight with a grand cultivator in the knowing destiny state, the huge gap in battle consciousness alone would make him feel hopeless. However, there were many fragments of consciousness left by Lotus deep in his sense of perception. As the great divine priest of West Hill, the bigwig who was the protector of the front gate of the Buddhism sect, he had already reached the peak of the knowing destiny state when he was alive. If not for some very mysterious reasons, he would have already broken through the 5 states and become a divine transcendence. What kind of state did the fragments of consciousness left by Master Lotus reach? Ning Kei did not know. This kind of thing could only be found out in the battle. After waking up, Ning Kei felt refreshed and sober. After confirming that his body and spirit were in the best state of his life, he left the house of red sleeves with Sang Sang. The wind and snow in Chang'an were heavier than in the morning. Like goose feathers, they danced restlessly and then fell, dyeing the whole city white. Holding the dirty big black umbrella, Ning Kei and Sang Sang walked in this plain world of ice and snow, like a dazzling drop of ink. The common people in the city were celebrating the festival. Accompanied by the mellow smell of mutton giblet soup, the thick snow on the eaves seemed to have become freshly cooked mutton slices. The nobles also celebrated the festival. However, there was no noise coming from the quiet and solemn mansions in the North City. Ning Kei knew why. The officials in the mansions were all going to the imperial city to see Xia Ho off. They might even send the general out of Chang'an. He held the handle of the big black umbrella in his right hand and held Sang Sang's hand in his left. They walked in the wind and snow, in the beautiful atmosphere of the marketplace and the noble atmosphere of the North City. He was silent. In the summer of the 15th year of Tianqi era, Chang'an had been peaceful for a long time. The people in the city, including the senior brothers and sisters in the academy, probably thought that the peace would continue. They all thought that Ning Kei had given up the idea. No matter how they looked at it, they could not find a suitable way for him. It was impossible for Ning Kei to give up. Just like what he had said to Sang Sang in the summer, if he did not kill Xia Ho would really be old. Revenge itself was not important. What was important was that he had to give an account of his life. Without this account, his life would not be complete. He might die because Xia Ho was indeed very powerful. In the wilderness, even eldest brother said that he was not sure that he could kill Xia Ho. But he did not think that he would die. Except for the headmaster of academy, no one in the world knew better than him that he was very powerful now. Life was like a puzzle. Ning Kei had solved many puzzles in the past 15 years. The purpose of solving the puzzles was today's battle, and he firmly believed that he would win. The imperial city was shrouded in heavy snow. The red palace wall was particularly eye-catching in the snow. The atmosphere in front of the imperial city was different from the cold wind and snow. Dozens of luxurious horse carriages were waiting outside the square in front of the palace. A few hundred feet ahead of the jade fence of the moat was the palace gate. There were many people there. Prince Li Peiyan came. The Defender General of the State Su Shi, the Grand Secretary and the ministers came. Except for the Prime Minister who was recuperating from illness, all the bigwigs of the imperial court and the military of the Tang Empire appeared in front of the imperial city. They were here to see off General Xiaofan. Looking at the tall figure slowly walking out of the gate of the imperial city, the bigwigs' faces showed complicated emotions. Some smiled comfortingly, some sighed, and some were sad. This was the first general of the Tang Empire to retire in the Tianqi era. Looking back more than 100 years, he was probably the only general who had given up his military power without any reason. Xiaofan slowly walked out of the gate. Looking at the bigwigs and colleagues who had been with him for decades, his solemn face was also very complicated. Leaving the imperial palace and going to his hometown, he was no longer a general, but a farmer retiring in old age. He was indeed a little reluctant. He was reluctant to give up the power to hold a killing knife in his hand. He was reluctant to give up the iron cavalry in the military camp. He was reluctant to give up the days of watching swords by lantern at night. What was most reluctant was that the law of the Tang Empire could not shake him, the enemy's army could not defeat him, and even the West Hill Divine Palace quietly indulged him. But he was forced to leave this prosperous stage. However, since the founding of the Tang Empire, there were not many ministers who could receive such an honor. Not to mention that a traitor of the Devil's Doctrine could become a visiting professor of Haotian Taoism, a general of the Tang Empire, expand the territory, kill countless people, and retire peacefully. This was a very perfect life. Xiaofan was very satisfied. In the quiet city gate, he walked out of the palace and walked toward the bigwigs who were looking at him with a smile. With every step he took, his whole body relaxed a little. Walking out of the city gate, his military boots squeaked on the snow. Xiaofan frowned slightly. He did not return the salute to the prince who personally welcomed him, but looked to the south of the imperial palace. The prince's expression changed slightly and he turned to look. The people at the palace gate all found something strange and turned to look in that direction in confusion. Old General Su Shi suddenly coughed painfully. In the sky full of snow, his white eyebrows looked like two pieces of sticky snow that refused to fall. He was a little angry, but also a little helpless. In the sky full of snow, a big black umbrella slowly walked over. There were two people under the black umbrella. The black umbrella was very big and its surface was very thick. No matter how strong the wind and snow were, it could not invade it. The heavy snow fell on the oily surface of the black umbrella, but did not stick to it. Instead, it seemed to be a little afraid and slid to the sides. Looking at the big black umbrella slowly in the snow, Xiaofan did not know why he felt completely relaxed. It was not until this moment that he realized that he had actually been waiting for the arrival of this person. The traditional version has been published. Today I received the sample book. I like it very much. Thank you to the students of the publishing house. My friends from Taiwan, I wonder if you have seen it. In addition, about understanding this song, the singer of China voice did not sing my favorite song. I still like the version with Yang Zhongwei's broken voice the most. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for it and vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 469. In the wind and snow, the big black umbrella slowly came to the palace gate and stopped in front of the Tang civil and military officials. Then it closed, revealing Ning Kei and Sang Sang under the umbrella. It was dead silent in front of the imperial city. Only the sound of the cold wind blowing the snow, the sound of the snow falling on the ice of the moat, and people's own breathing could be heard. These bigwigs looked at Ning Ke and frowned at the same time. They seemed to be very confused about what Mr. 13 of the Academy wanted to do on the day General Xiahou left the capital. Their complicated expressions and confusion were actually cover-ups. They all knew about the rumor and knew that the military had investigated Ning Ke's connection with the murder cases, so they could guess his intention. But from summer to autumn and then to winter, Chang'an had been peaceful for a long time. When the whole world thought that Ning Ke had given up, he really appeared. In the silence, everyone looked at Ning Ke with vigilance and uneasiness. Zheng Jing, the Grand Secretary of the Imperial Library, looked at Sang Sang beside Ning Ke with a worried expression. Princely Peiyan slowly took a step forward and looked at Ning Ke with hidden anger. He said, "What do you want to do?" General Su Shi looked at Ning Ke expressionlessly and said, "If you want to assassinate a general of the Tang Empire in front of all the civil and military officials, I will admire your courage and stupidity." The snow continued to fall toward the imperial city. Ning Ke brushed off the thick snow on his shoulder and said, "Even if I have the courage, I will not be so stupid. But since I am here, I have to do something." Su Shi said lightly and sarcastically, "What can you do in front of the law of the Tang Empire?" The change in front of the imperial city gate had alarmed the Yulin royal guards and the imperial bodyguards. The chief eunuch who had sent General Xiahou to the exit had already run into the palace as fast as he could to inform His Majesty of the news. Many imperial court subordinates came from the square and walked behind the adults. They opened umbrellas to shelter them from the wind and snow. In front of the red wall, flowers of different colors suddenly bloomed. Ning Ke's big black umbrella had been put away and was held in Sang Sang's hand. The master and handmaiden stood in the wind and snow calmly, looking at the more and more umbrellas in front of them. The shadows of the umbrellas shrouded the faces of the adults. No one could see the emotions on their faces, nor could they see the thoughts in their eyes. Ning Ke looked at Su Shi and said calmly, "The law of the Tang Empire comes first. This is the iron rule of the Academy. As a disciple of the Academy and a student of the headmaster of the Academy, I will certainly abide by it." Duels became the most common scene in Chang'an. On that spring night 2 years ago, Ning Ke and Sang Sang returned from the city of Wei to Chang'an and saw a duel on the street that night. At that time, he explained to the little handmaiden beside him that the rule of duels in Chang'an was that cutting one's sleeve represented a challenge, and that it was called a live game. As long as there was a winner, it would be fine. However, if the challenger cut his left palm, it meant that the duel was a dead game. At this time, in the snow of the imperial city, Ning Ke slowly cut his left palm, which meant that the challenge he issued to Xiahou today was not a spiritual comfort as people had previously thought, but a dead game of life and death. Although the civil and military officials present were of high status and could not be challenged, they all lived in Chang'an and knew this extremely well-known rule. So they were shocked and even pale. In their view, General Xiahou would definitely win today's challenge. However, if it was a dead game, and Ning Ke died, with his identity as a core disciple of the headmaster of Academy, it would still have a terrible impact on the imperial court of the Tang Empire. Li Peiyan stared at Ning Ke with a pale face and said, "Are you going to use your life in exchange for the headmaster's anger? Is it worth it? And what kind of person is the headmaster? How can he be used by you?" The blade had already cut the base of his palm. Ning Ke stopped moving and raised his head. His expression was still so calm, as if the pain in his palm did not affect him at all. He looked at the prince and said, "What does this have to do with your highness? Are you afraid that I will challenge you next?" Su Shi looked at him and said expressionlessly, "A duel of life and death requires the approval of the government. I can tell you that no one in the imperial court of the Tang Empire dares to approve this duel. When Daosher monk came to challenge me, it was approved by the military ministry. When Lu Yiqing challenged me, it was also approved by the military ministry. Today, I challenge General Xiahou. Does the military ministry not approve? Ning Ke looked at him and asked seriously, does the Tang Empire's military have any shame? Su Shi frowned slightly and did not speak. Ning Ke looked at everyone in front of the imperial city and said, you all say that the law of the Tang Empire is the first. Fine, I will challenge according to the law of the Tang Empire. I want to know who can stop me. Then he looked at Xiahou and said, unless you don't accept it. Xiahou slowly stroked the thin letter of challenge between his fingers. His expression was a little strange. He looked at him and said, your choice is indeed beyond my expectation. Ning Ke said, I have never taken the ordinary path. Xiahou lightly flicked the thin paper in his hand and said, when I saw this paper moving slowly in the wind and snow, I knew that your psyche power is very sensitive. It is a pity that your snow mountain and ocean of qi are blocked, and your control of the qi of heaven and earth is extremely bad, even worse than the see-through state that you should have. You are so bad, and yet you want to challenge me. I can only say that you have embarked on a dead end. Ning Ke looked at him and said, I have no other path to take, so I have to take this path. As for whether it is a dead end, I will know when I reach the end. Xiahou said, for you, challenging me head-on is the worst choice. Ning Ke said, since it is the only choice, then it is the best choice. Ning Ke's choice was decided when I started the book. It was decided on the night he and Sang Sang entered Chang'an. It was really the only choice and the best choice. But he is not Su Lu. He doesn't know the concept of bravery. It's just a decision made after careful consideration and helplessness. I am here to report that there is still some time before I kill Xiahou. This is just a bone, and I have other things to write. It is meat, very important, and there is more today. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 470. Xiahou smiled and slowly walked out of the umbrella held by his subordinate. He walked into the wind and snow and his smile suddenly disappeared. He looked at Ning Ke coldly and said, is this the Academy's choice? Ning Ke also smiled and said, you don't have to be afraid. This is my own choice. It has nothing to do with the Academy. Xiahou said indifferently, if you want to die, then you will die. Ning Ke said, I don't want to die. I only want you to die. Xiahou looked at him and said after a long silence, you are a madman. Ning Ke replied, 15 years ago, I escaped from Chang'an. I used the determination and willpower to die to survive. It was just to go crazy. Is it not worth it? Xiahou was silent for a moment and said, it is indeed worth it. The idea of returning good for evil had never been popular in the Tang Empire. People living in this land were used to being simple and direct. If you want to beat me, I will beat you. If you want to kill me, I will kill you. If you kill my father, I will kill your father and you. Therefore, everyone felt that it was reasonable for Ning Ke to invite Xiahou to a duel to the death. Through the academy, the imperial court had promised to cut off the past and let Xiahou retire. It was because they did not want the complications of the past to affect the future of the empire. They did not want the West Hill Divine Palace to meddle in Chang'an. If Ning Ke wanted to use tricks to deal with Xiahou, it would affect the process of metabolism. But today, he chose the simplest, or perhaps the stupidest, method. It would not leave any repercussions. Because if the environment was fair, then the duel must be fair. Fairness did not mean there were no problems. Everyone thought that Ning Ke was courting death by challenging General Xiao. No one wanted to see Ning Ke die because he was a disciple of the headmaster of the academy. But they could not stop this duel now and could only hope that Xiao would not accept Ning Ke's invitation. As a powerhouse at the peak state of martial arts, it was indeed very humiliating to refuse the challenge of a see-through realm. Therefore, the prince looked at Xiao with a faint pleading expression. Xiao didn't seem to notice the prince's gaze. He squinted and said, "Since you want to die in my hands, right at this moment," the sound of hurried footsteps could be heard outside the palace gate. A few high-ranking eunuchs were desperately running towards the door. Their official robes were in a mess and they looked extremely battered and exhausted. In the cold wind and snow, they were so hot that their foreheads were covered with sweat. It seemed like they had run all the way out of the palace. Eunuch Lin, who was running at the very front of the group of eunuchs, heard Xiao's voice from a distance. A terrified expression appeared on his face. Like a goose whose throat had been grabbed, he shrieked in panic, "His Majesty has decreed that no one is to move." When the important figures of the outer palace heard this shout, their expressions suddenly relaxed. They thought that in this world, perhaps only the emperor could stop this challenge. However, Xiao didn't seem to hear the shrill voice coming from the palace gate behind him, nor did he hear the emperor's decree. With an indifferent expression, he continued, "Then I will fulfill your wish." After saying this, he took a knife from a bodyguard behind him. With a swish, he cut a large wound on his left palm. Compared to Ning Ke's slow cutting of his palm earlier, this movement was exceptionally simple and powerful. Xiao's face was expressionless. He slowly clenched his left hand into a fist. Thick blood flowed from the webbing between his thumb and index finger. Eunuch Lin had never run so fast or so hard in his life. When he ran out of the palace gate, panting, he saw Xiao's bleeding palm. His face immediately turned extremely pale. His legs gave way and he sat down in the snow. Prince Li Peiyan's face was as pale as snow. Su Shi's silver eyebrows were as calm as the snow on the willows by the lake. He looked at Xiao and said expressionlessly, "Withdraw it." Xiao shook his head and said indifferently, "He can withdraw it, but I can't. Because I have my pride." Hearing this, Ning Ke began to clap. His left palm was still bleeding. As he clapped, the blood scattered and splashed in all directions, landing on his black academy uniform and on the white snow on the ground. The scene looked extremely bloody. The clapping was also very bloody. The blood splashed, giving off a feeling that it was about to coagulate. Ning Ke said, "I am not disappointed. You are indeed still that arrogant and ruthless general. You are indeed arrogant to the point of stupidity. I hope that you will continue to be so arrogant." Xiao ignored his mockery and said expressionlessly, "When?" The date column on the thin challenge document was blank. Ning Ke said, "As long as it is before you leave Chang'an." Xiao said, "I am leaving today." Ning Ke said, "Then today it is." Xiao said, "Very good. I will set off after killing you. It shouldn't take too long." Ning Ke said, "Perhaps you won't set off again." Xiao was still expressionless. He said indifferently, "I will decide the time and you decide the location. I have prepared the location for a long time." Ning Ke said, "I have bought many houses by the Yanming Lake. I don't need to worry about hurting innocent people when I fight there. Besides, I have made some preparations there. After all, I am a talisman master and know a little about tactical arrays. My state is not as good as yours, so I want to take advantage of you in this aspect." When the two were talking, no one interrupted. They listened in shock and helplessness. Ning Ke smiled and said, "Umbrella." With a bang, Sang Sang opened the big black umbrella again to block the falling snow above her head. In the wind and snow, a blood flag and a black umbrella faced each other. Mr. 13 of the Academy, Ning Ke, had issued a life-and-death challenge to General Xiaofan. This news spread to every mansion in Chang and in the shortest time possible. No one thought that Ning Ke could win, so no one was willing to watch General Xiaofan kill him. Because no one knew what the headmaster of the academy would do because of Ning Ke's death. The headmaster of the academy had not spoken for many years and had even been forgotten by the common people. But for the bigwigs in the imperial court, it did not mean that the headmaster of the academy's voice had lost its power. It was because every word he said was like a thunder above the clouds to the Tang Empire. This was a fair challenge initiated by Ning Quebec. Maybe even if Ning Ke died, the headmaster of the academy would still abide by the law of the Tang Empire and remain silent. But no one dared to take such a risk, even if it was a small one. If the headmaster of the academy was angry after Ning Ke's death, the entire Chang and would probably be destroyed. When the nation master Li Qingshan appeared in front of the cloud gate array, he had been thinking about these things. So when he heard the reply from Mr. First of the Academy, he was stunned for a long time. This is youngest brother's personal matter. The Academy will not stop him according to the rules of the Academy. Li Qingshan frowned and said, but Ning Ke is seeking his own death. Eldest brother said gently, since he is seeking his own death, who can stop him? Li Qingshan could not suppress the shock in his heart and said, if Mr. 13 really dies in the hands of General Xiaofan, what will the academy do? Eldest brother smiled and said, we will miss him. There was the Yulin Royal Guards in Chang'an. This powerful army was responsible for guarding the imperial city and possessed unimaginable power. It had powerful cultivators from the Imperial Center Administration and the Southern Gate Temple. Most importantly, it had strong willpower and determination. According to the law of the Tang Empire, the Yulin Royal Guards only listened to the orders of two people, the Tang Emperor and General Su Shi. Against the cold wind and snow, the Yulin Royal Guards began to form up and prepare to leave the camp. However, they had to stop in front of the Jade Bridge outside the camp because there was a person on the bridge. That person was wearing a tall hat and a robe. He sat cross-legged in the snow on the bridge with his head slightly lowered. Su Shi looked at the person on the bridge and could no longer suppress the anger in his heart. His voice burst out like thunder at the bridge and shook the flying snow. Jun Mo, those who stand in our way will die. The person on the bridge was naturally second brother of the academy, Jun Mo, those who stand in our way will die. This has never been mentioned in the law of the Tang Empire. Second brother raised his head and looked at the military leader of the Tang Empire under the bridge. He said calmly, if so, if you want me to die, you must die first. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 471. Except for Ji Haoran and Ning Ke, the two generations of people who had entered the human realm, the back of the mountain of the academy had never entered the human realm. The soldiers of the Yulin Royal Guards on the other side of the bridge did not know who the man sitting cross-legged in the snow was. Hearing that this person actually dared to be so disrespectful to General Su Shi and be so arrogant, the Imperial Guards were instantly enraged to the extreme. Their beards and hairs stood on end as if they wanted to pierce through the armor on their bodies, and they drew their swords and spears with the intention of charging onto the snow bridge and beheading that bastard on the spot. Su Shi raised his right arm expressionlessly, and the commotion and killing intent behind him immediately subsided. He looked at the man sitting cross-legged in the snow and became serious. He said, is the academy really going to go back on its words? Second brother looked at him under the bridge and said, the academy does not object to Xiao's retirement, nor does it object to youngest brother's challenge. Because there is no way to object. Su Shi frowned and said, "You know I'm going to object to this." Second brother said, "I object to your objection." Su Shi looked at the man on the bridge. After a long silence, he asked in a hoarse voice, "Is this the headmaster's idea?" Second brother said, "No, it's my idea." Su Shi squinted and said, "That's why you are standing on the bridge." Second brother sat cross-legged in the snow, tall and straight. His robe did not tremble in the wind. He looked like a pine tree in the snow peak, very much like the great figure of the academy. He looked at Su Shi and the cavalry of the Yulin royal guards under the bridge and said expressionlessly, "I respect youngest brother, so I will not interfere. But I want him to be fair." In the imperial study of the palace, angry curses, fierce arguments, idiots, and all kinds of filthy words kept ringing. They were like snowflakes dancing in the sky, spreading everywhere. Nation Master Li Qingshan left the academy and entered Chang'an as fast as he could. He came to the newly renovated small Taoist temple. Because of the heavy snow, the neighborhood celebration had ended hastily. Yi Su smiled after hearing what happened in the imperial city and disappeared in the wind and snow. Many horse carriages came from the streets outside the imperial city. All the forces who had received the news had sent people to inquire about it, including the envoys of various countries and the representatives of the West Hill Divine Palace. In a pavilion far away from the moat, Yi Hongyu, who was dressed in a green Taoist robe, looked in the direction of the palace gate. She looked at the blood flag and the dazzling big black umbrella that were fluttering in the wind and snow. She remained silent. Chen Pipi brought Tang Xiaotang from the other end of the snowy street. Because of Tang Xiaotang's status, he did not let her follow him to the imperial palace. He turned around and knocked on the tightly closed door of a shop on the South Street. He borrowed a chair from that shop and then moved his round body from the snowy street to the foot of the imperial city. He looked at Ning Ke and said, "Before preparing to fight, you have to conserve your strength." Ning Ke replied, "Thank you, senior brother." A personal guard had already brought a table and a chair for Xiaoho, and even a cup of hot tea. In front of the blood flag, amidst the wind and snow, he held the teacup and casually drank, his expression naturally calm. Seeing Chen Pipi, Xiaoho frowned slightly, but did not pay much attention to him. Ning Ke sat on the chair, and Sang Sang held the big black umbrella behind the chair. Chen Pipi wanted to bandage his bleeding left palm, but Ning Ke shook his head and refused. In front of the palace gate, the blood flag and the black umbrella were in the wind and snow. The general was drinking hot tea, and Ning Ke was resting. This scene was very strange, even a little absurd, but also very scary. Many horse carriages were hidden in the streets in front of the imperial city, and many people had not arrived at the scene. They were waiting for the final result in their respective mansions. Mr. Second's appearance on the snow bridge is equivalent to the Academy's attitude. The Academy agrees that Ning Ke will challenge Xiaoho, so the Tang military cannot stop this. The third minister of offerings from Qinghe County withdrew his gaze from the falling snow in front of the balcony of the princess mansion. He looked at the two noble royal siblings and said with a smile, "Congratulations, Your Highness." Li Yu's expression was very calm, but there was a hidden worry in the depths of her eyes. Xiaoho was the empress's most powerful helper. It was a good thing for her and Li Huiyuan that he retired. It was even better for Ning Ke to challenge Xiaoho. No matter who won or lost, even if the Academy kept silent about it, they would still hate the empress's side. However, she could not be happy, because she, like everyone else in the world, believed that Ning Ke could not defeat Xiaoho. In other words, Ning Ke would definitely die today. She looked at He Mingqi, who had been sitting silently on the other side, and slightly frowned. She asked, "What did Mr. Yi Su say about the nation master going to the small Taoist temple?" He Mingqi shook his head and said, "Even if the West Hill Divine Palace wants to stop this in Chang'an, it is impossible, because the Academy has already agreed. The third Minister of Offerings said lightly, "If your Highness is still worried, I may have some means to make the West Hill Divine Palace and the Academy hate each other because of this matter." Hearing this, Li Yu's expression gradually turned cold. She slightly narrowed her eyes and warned, "Don't try to use any means to provoke the Academy's anger. Neither you nor I can bear it." The third Minister of Offerings was usually respected in Qinghe Prefecture, like an ancestor. In front of the Princess of the Tang Empire, he could consider himself inferior. However, after hearing this, he still felt a little embarrassed. "Your Highness is right. Then I will go and have a look," he said expressionlessly. He gently flicked his sleeves and walked out of the balcony. Facing the wind and snow, he left the princess mansion and walked towards the Yanming Lake. The snow kept falling, and it was getting heavier and heavier, falling on Chang'an. No matter how light the snow was, it would eventually fall on the ground, or be swept into the gutters, or accumulate until the next year. When the flowers bloomed in spring, it would be melted by the sun, mixed with dust and withered leaves, and disappear without a trace. This was the truth of heaven and earth. Just as what should be done had to be done, people who should come would come. Many people came to Chang'an accompanied by the wind and snow, including a monk. The monk was wearing a worn-out bamboo hat and a tattered kapok kasaya. His face, which was exposed under the shadow of the bamboo hat, was ordinary, but it had a natural sense of determination. The monk entered the city through the west gate and stood on the snowy long street. It seemed that he did not know where to go. He turned to a porridge shop, took off his bamboo hat and began to ask for directions. He took off his bamboo hat, revealing a head full of sharp green and black hair. He looked as determined as the monk. However, when he asked for directions, the smile on his face was so kind and gentle. It was not accurate to use the word asking for directions. The monk kept his mouth tightly shut, and when he occasionally grinned, only half of his tongue was left. It turned out that he was a mute who could not speak. For Ning Ke and Xia Ho, who were sitting in the wind and snow, the 2 hours were very long. No matter how cold the wind and snow was, their bodies had already warmed up. For His Majesty in the palace and Su Shi on the other side of the snow bridge, the 2 hours were very short. Because the Academy's attitude made them feel helpless and they had no time to do more. Just when the 2 hours were about to end, the imperial court finally found a way. The palace gate suddenly opened. Li Qingshan, the nation master of Tang, and Zheng Jing, the Grand Secretary of the Imperial Library, hurried to the field under the escort of dozens of eunuchs and began to read His Majesty's decree. Prince Li Peiyan walked silently at the back of the crowd. Zheng Jing, the Grand Secretary of the Imperial Library, ranked last in the Tang cabinet. However, he was Songsong's biological father and had a special status. Li Qingshan, the nation master of Tang, was a cultivator and usually did not care about the court affairs. However, he and Ning Ke were old friends. Since Master Yen say, Ning Ke had to call him Uncle Master. His Majesty asked them to read the decree, so he naturally wanted to move them with affection. Sure enough, Ning Ke had to stand up and salute them when he saw them. Zheng Jing coughed twice and reached out to wipe off the snow on the imperial edict. He said, His Majesty's decree. Everyone in front of the imperial city held their breath and pondered. Zheng Jing glanced at Prince Li Peiyan and sighed softly. Then he said bitterly, Li Peiyan, Prince Yi of the Tang Empire, requests to be stripped of his title due to the incident in the first year of Tianqi era. Everyone was silent. The people in front of the imperial city could not suppress their shock and looked at His Majesty. Li Peiyan's noble crown was still in the snow between Ning Ke and Xia Ho, and it was about to be buried by the snow. His hair was a little messy and he looked a little embarrassed, but the expression on his face was unusually indifferent. Zheng Jing ignored the reaction of the crowd. He held the imperial edict with both hands and continued to read in a trembling voice, "The case of the former Xianwei General Lin Guangyuan's treason is now revoked due to lack of evidence." The names on the imperial edict were read one by one through the Grand Secretary's trembling voice. His voice echoed in the wind and snow and hit the red wall. Xianwei General Lin Guangyuan, Mrs. Lin Guangyuan, Deputy General Xia Gang, Captain Cheng Xinzheng. Secretary Lin Hai, subordinate Hu Hua, listening to the names that had long disappeared in history, listening to the imperial edicts that restored officials and conferred posthumous titles, there was dead silence in front of the imperial city. His Majesty's imperial edict did not mention reopening the old case. However, a prince requested to be stripped of his title and all the soldiers involved were rehabilitated. What was the difference between this and reversing the case? People finally understood the meaning of the imperial palace. His Majesty had once thought of reversing the case of the Xianwei general's treason. However, because of the situation in the imperial court and the West Hill Divine Palace, especially the lack of evidence, he did not succeed. Today, the Academy tacitly allowed Ning Ke to challenge Xia Ho, which set a difficult problem for the imperial court. However, His Majesty could not reverse the case without evidence, so he chose this method. Even if it was not to reverse the case, it was still to reverse the case. At least, this could give an explanation to those who died unjustly and Ning Ke today. When the imperial edict was read, Xia Ho stood up from his chair. His Majesty's imperial edict did not involve him, but he gradually frowned and slowly sat back down. Those names were still floating in the wind and snow. Xia Ho knew those names and had seen the people that those names represented. More than a decade ago, he had seen those people die in front of him with his own eyes. He had seen those heads piled up into a hill. Some eyes were closed, some eyes were open, and some eyes were filled with despair, while others were filled with anger. Those names were heard again after more than a decade. In front of the imperial city, they entered his ears. He became more and more silent, and his face became more and more livid. He held the armrest of the chair more and more tightly. He did not feel guilty, nor did he blame himself, nor was he sad. He was just angry. The armrest was reduced to dust, falling from the gaps between his fingers. With anger, it landed on the snow. No one noticed General Xia Ho's emotions at this time. Because His Majesty's imperial edict did not mention him. According to the law, he was no longer General Xia Ho. What he needed to do was to accept it calmly and then leave Chang'an. Everyone's eyes were on Ning Quebec. They knew who His Majesty's imperial edict was for. If they wanted to stop this duel of life and death, they could only hope that Ning Ke would withdraw the challenge invitation. His Majesty reversed the verdict for Lin Guangyuan, rewarded him generously, and favored him for 3 generations, just for this. People in front of the imperial city looked at Ning Ke under the black umbrella and thought that this should be the end. From the moment he heard the name Lin Guangyuan, Ning Ke lowered his head and focused on the thick snow under his feet. He tilted his head and listened to the names on the imperial edict attentively. He had heard of those names before, so he listened very carefully today. But the expression on his face was very complicated, with some gratification, some disappointment, and some self-mockery. The names on the imperial edict were finally read. Grand Secretary Zheng Jing and Nation Master Li Qingshan walked to him and solemnly handed the imperial edict to him. Ning Ke took the imperial edict and remained silent. Li Qingshan looked solemn and said, "His Majesty said that as long as you admit to the previous murders, he will pardon you. After all, it is pardonable. If you think that the removal of the prince's title is not enough to compensate, His Majesty and Her Majesty will apologize to you on behalf of General Xia Ho and compensate you." The Nation Master spoke very softly and was covered by the wind and snow. Except for himself and Ning Ke, no one could hear him. But people could guess what he was talking about with Ning Quebec. However, Ning Ke made an unexpected decision just when everyone thought that this was the end of the matter and gradually relaxed. Ning Ke put the imperial edict on the chair behind him and looked at Li Qingshan, Zheng Jing, and the people in front of the imperial city. He laughed and then raised his hand. Chapter 472. Since a long time ago, the military had begun to investigate the connection between Ning Ke and those strange murder cases. Although they did not find any evidence, the rumor of his origin had already spread in Chang'an. Everyone believed that Ning Ke was the son of Xianwei General Lin Guangyuan, the orphan of the massacre. He had been dormant in the world for many years and finally entered the academy. Once he gained power, he would start a bloody revenge. Even His Majesty, Xiahou, and many senior brothers and sisters at the back of the mountain of the academy believed this rumor. Therefore, at this time, when the people in front of the imperial city heard Ning Ke's words, they could not help but be shocked and could not believe it. They thought to themselves, if you are not Lin Guangyuan's orphan, then why did you do these things? Xiahou looked at Ning Ke under the black umbrella and frowned. No one knew what he was thinking. Ning Ke looked down at the blood spots that looked like plum blossoms on the snow. He seemed to see the blood spots on the ground in the woodshed 15 years ago, and a strange smile appeared on his face. The wind and snow suddenly scattered and gathered, gradually becoming faster and faster. Ning Ke raised his head, looked at the crowd and asked 3 questions. Why do you all think I'm the general's son? Why must I be the general's son? Why do you all want me to be the general's son? Everyone was still in a state of extreme shock and couldn't answer his question. Ning Ke laughed at himself and said, unfortunately, I'm not. My father is not the Xianwei general, not a captain, not a subordinate officer, not even a clerk. He is just a gatekeeper of the general's mansion, and a gatekeeper of the second gate. Even so, he doesn't get much. My mother was naturally not the general's wife. She was just a lowly servant girl. Although she had fed the young master and could enter the inner residence, she was still just a servant girl. Your Majesty has reversed the verdict for the general. I am very gratified. This is my true feeling, because the general and his wife were good people. They died unjustly, but I am very regretful that I did not hear my parents' names. He looked at the crowd in front of the imperial city and said, this is a very natural thing. My parents were originally unremarkable people, and their names were also very unremarkable. My father is an orphan. The general gave him the surname Lin. His name is Lin Tao. My mother didn't even have a name. She was sold to Chang'an from Hebei County. She was called Li Sanyang from her childhood until her death because she vaguely remembered that she was the 3rd child in her family. The blood continued to flow down Ning Ke's palm onto the snow. His expression was very calm, and so was his narration. It was not indifference, but true calmness. They seemed to see the scene in the woodshed of the official of council's mansion more than a decade ago. A 4-year-old boy, holding a rusty chopper, stood in front of the 2 corpses. His face was full of despair and fear, and his body kept trembling, as if he could collapse at any time. But the boy didn't collapse. Now, the boy was standing in the wind and snow, standing in front of the majestic palace, standing in front of people, telling the story of that long ago. The stories in the books were often written like that. The story he told was not in the books. On the first anniversary of the night, I finally told one of the stories I wanted to tell the most in this story. I feel very happy. 80 clock, crooked. 55373, let's chat. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 474. This snow seems to be unfair to me, but it is actually unfair to Xiao. Ning Ke looked at the other side of the lake and the snow on the lake. He shook his head and continued, His Majesty took away the array pestle, which naturally doesn't make me happy. But it is fair. My cultivation state is far lower than Xiao's, so it seems unfair. But in fact, I have prepared for 15 years, and he doesn't know that there is a person like me in the world who has been watching him silently. So the unfairness here is even. As long as this battle is limited to me and him, then I will admit that it is fair. Sang Sang held the handle of the big black umbrella tightly and shrank her body to ensure that the umbrella would not be blown away by the violent snow. She whispered, Young master, are you worried that someone will intervene? After all, Xiao is a visiting professor of Haotian Taoism besides being a general of the empire. I always feel that someone will interrupt this battle. I did feel something when I held the array pestle. Ning Ke thought of his peers in the academy and said, But I am not worried, because this is Chang'an and not other places. As long as the academy is still in the south of the city, no one is qualified to intervene. Perhaps some forces wanted to intervene in this battle, but more people were just silently waiting for the battle to begin by the Yanming Lake, such as Yi Su who had left the small Taoist temple. The best place to watch a battle was, of course, a high place. At this time, he was on the city wall of Chang'an, and his plain white robe was fluttering in the night snow. Many people thought that the West Hill Divine Palace did not want to see the battle between Xiao and Ning Quebec. In fact, the envoy of the Divine Hall had indeed raised objections to the Imperial Palace, but he, who came to Chang'an on behalf of Haotian Taoism, could ignore the Divine Hall's attitude. Although he also wanted to see Xiao retire safely, he did not mind the battle happening. Because no matter how Yi Su deduced, he could not imagine that Ning Ke could win. It was good that Xiao could win. It was better that Xiao killed Ning Ke and offended the academy. Because then, he could no longer stay in the Tang Empire and retire peacefully, nor could he waver on the wall. He could only pledge his loyalty to Haotian Taoism. Although the Dao sect's idea is good, we must first ensure that Xiao can win. A voice rang out from the top of the city wall. This person spoke very slowly, but his voice was still very clear in the snowstorm. It seemed to be able to calm people's hearts. Eldest brother walked to Yi Su's side and looked in the direction of the dark Yanming Lake below the city wall. Yi Su said, We just met in the morning, and you're here again? Eldest brother said, Yes, I'm here to take a look. Yi Su asked, What are you here to see? Eldest brother looked at Yi Su and said with a smile, Now that your sword style is calm, there is no one else but Mr. Liu Bai who can beat you in Chang'an. That's why I came to see you. Looking at you is actually looking at you. Yi Su looked at the falling snow in front of the city wall and said expressionlessly, No one in Chang'an is my match, but there is an academy outside the city. Tonight, the wind and snow were furious. Many people were sitting peacefully in the snow. The third minister of offerings of Qinghe County sat in the winter forest on the east bank of Yanming Lake. The night snow fell from the sky. He looked indifferent, as if he did not feel the coldness around him. Considering the interests of the Qinghe County families and Her Highness, he could not allow anyone to disturb this battle. However, he had a feeling earlier, so he came to the forest and waited silently. A monk walked slowly in the night snow. It was dark in the forest, but the monk's cotton kasaya and the bamboo hat on his head could be clearly seen, naturally revealing a sense of righteousness. The third minister of offerings looked at the monk walking in the wind and snow and frowned slightly. A few years ago, he was already a grand cultivator in the knowing destiny state. However, at this moment, he found that he could not see through the monk's depth. He could not help but be extremely vigilant and have a desire to fight. When powerhouses confronted each other, they fought for a moment. There was no need for any verbal probing, nor was there a need to ask about the origin of the mountain. The third minister of offerings reached behind him and pulled out the hilt of his sword. The sword rubbed against the edge of the scabbard, making a very subtle sound, like snowflakes falling on a thick layer of snow. However, the sword was only pulled out halfway before it was forced to stop. The third minister of offerings' eyebrows gradually rose. His hand holding the hilt of his sword trembled slightly, and all the cultivation in his body spurted out. However, the sword in the scabbard behind him did not continue to be pulled out. Instead, it slowly returned to the scabbard. The sound of the sword rubbing against the scabbard was as quiet as falling snow, but it made his heart palpitate. The monk wearing the bamboo hat walked slowly in the wind and snow and was only a few feet away from him. The third minister of offerings' body was extremely stiff. His hand holding the hilt of his sword trembled like a withered branch in the snow. Looking at the monk, there was only fear left in his usually proud eyes. The monk did not make any move. There was no change in the aura of heaven and earth in the snow forest. He just walked slowly, and yet a grand cultivator in the knowing destiny state could not pull out his sword. The third minister of offerings was extremely shocked. He could not imagine any cultivator in the world who could have such a skill. In a flash, he guessed the monk's origin and his pupils shrank. Someone from the Xiankong temple? The third priest looked at the monk who was getting closer and closer. He looked at the monk's gentle and determined eyes. His stiff body began to tremble slightly in fear. He let out a muffled groan and his face suddenly turned red. His skinny fingers suddenly spread out and escaped the traces of the aura of heaven and earth floating in the snow forest. He wanted to escape from the monk's control. The monk raised his right palm in front of him. He bent his index finger slightly and made an unknown emblematic gesture. The wind and snow in the winter forest suddenly became stronger. Thousands of snowflakes seemed to fall on the third minister of offerings of Qinghe County. The snowflakes sensed the supreme power of the monk's emblematic gesture and sank into the third minister of offerings' clothes. They turned into countless invisible snow ropes and tied him up. The monk glanced at him, his eyes full of benevolence and pity. Then he started walking again, stepping on the thick snow, walking past him, as if he was walking towards the lakeside outside the winter forest. The third minister of offerings sat alone in the snow. He could not move at all. His flushed cheeks had already become extremely pale. His eyes were filled with shame and fear. He was the respected ancestor of Qinghe County. After his cultivation entered the knowing destiny state, he became even more arrogant and confident. He did not even have much respect for the legendary unknown place like the academy. On this snowy night, he finally met a monk from the unknown place. He finally understood that a legend was just a legend. In front of the monk, even a grand cultivator in the knowing destiny state did not have the slightest qualification to be arrogant. The third minister of offerings thought of how he had boasted shamelessly in the princess mansion. He said that he wanted to create some disputes between the academy and Haotian Taoism. Now, he was tied up in the snow by the monk's emblematic gesture. He could not help but feel endless shame and wished that he could die. On the high city wall, Yi Su waved his hand to disperse the snowflakes within 50 feet in front of him. He looked at the dark forest by the Yanming Lake and said coldly, "That idiot from Qinghe County is extremely stupid. Even a small stem borer wants to be involved in the torrent. It's really disgusting." The eldest brother smiled and did not say anything. Yi Su said, "I wanted to kill that idiot. But since the mute has taken action, forget it." The eldest brother shook his head and said, "How can I watch you violate the laws of the Tang Empire?" Yi Su smiled slightly when he heard the words, "the laws of the Tang Empire." Eldest brother looked at the shore of Yanming Lake and thought of the monk who was walking through the winter forest to the lakeside. He said, the battle between youngest brother and General Xiahou is probably a grand event in the eyes of many people in the world. That is why you came to Chang'an. I just hope that nothing happens to youngest brother. Yi Su said, you know that I came to Chang'an not because of this battle, but because of Ning Quebec. That mute is naturally here for Ning Quebec. The eldest brother was very clear about what Yi Su wanted to say, but he remained silent and did not answer. Yi Su looked at the Yanming Lake and suddenly said with emotion, those people who appeared around the Black Line 15 years ago, except for Tang, all of us are here. The eldest brother said, actually, Tang is here too. The injuries on General Xiahou were all caused by him. So even though he did not come, his fists did. Yi Su said, that makes sense. But even if Xiahou has countless fists left by Tang, in my opinion, Ning Ke still has no chance in this cross-state battle. I know what you want to say and what you are worried about. I respect youngest brother, so I will not do anything. The eldest brother smiled and said, of course, I know that if youngest brother knew what the academy is thinking, he would definitely cry and beg me not to respect him. Yi Su said, what does Mr. Second mean by stopping Su Shi on the snow bridge? The eldest brother said, it means fairness. Yi Su said, Xiahou is far more powerful than Ning Quebec. Does the academy think this is also fair? The eldest brother said, teacher once taught us that fairness is the intention and has nothing to do with strength. As long as both sides are willing to do so and accept the rules, then it is fair. Yi Su was silent for a long time as he thought of the words of the headmaster of the academy. Then he looked at the night forest by the Yanming Lake and frowned slightly. He said, if that mute wants to speak, there are few people in this world who can stop him. Yi Su turned to look at him and asked, Jun Mo is stopping Su Shi, and you are looking at me. Then who can stop him? I will not stop him. And the moment he speaks, even I cannot stop him. Do we need to alarm the headmaster of the academy? The eldest brother looked at the lake in the cold winter night and frowned in silence. The snow was dancing. The monk walked in the forest towards the Yanming Lake. 15 years ago, in front of the Black Line, he smiled slightly, chewed his tongue and swallowed it. He never spoke again and had been practicing the silent meditation ever since. Tonight, he stepped into the mortal world again. No one knew if he would speak or what he would say. People only knew that he had been silent for 15 years. Once he opened his mouth, the Buddha's voice would be as clear as thunder. Even Yi Su, the powerful successor of the Jishou Abbey, did not want to hear the first sentence he would say. Who would talk to the monk? Did the headmaster of the academy really need to come down the mountain? At this moment, a very thin layer of snow fell from the night forest. The snow was extremely thin, so thin that it was translucent, like a cicada's wing. I'm going to pick up the leader and then go back to my parents' home with her. The second chapter will be updated very late. I have to report to everyone. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.